Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Mary Ford. I lead marketing and communications for CENTEGIX. And on behalf of all of our Georgia education organizations that are sponsoring this event with us today, we are honored that you're spending a little bit of time with us this afternoon to learn more about House Bill 268 and Georgia's latest school safety legislation. I'm going to do just a couple of administrative matters before I turn it over to Ben, who will lead us today. So if you have questions for us, please drop them into the Q&A. And please be assured that we will get the recording of this session out to everyone sometime tomorrow. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ben Wiggins. Ben, thank you so much for all of your help in arranging for this informative session today. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and welcome to everyone. We know that we had well over 450 people sign up for the webinar, so I think that speaks to the interest and that everyone has with this new school safety bill. We sent out an email a couple of weeks ago asking for questions, and it became very apparent to us that our school districts have lots of questions. So what we're going to do today, we anticipate getting lots of questions today. So Lacey or Sylvia, if I say this wrong, please step in and correct me. But we would like for our registered members to do anytime during this webinar, if you have a question, if you'll drop that question into the Q&A, and we will collect all of those questions, and we're going to get them to the appropriate people and or appropriate agency to make sure that we get the most accurate information. And once we get that most accurate information, we will send out an email to everyone that is registered for the webinar with those questions and specific answers. We'll also list those on the Gale website and put those in the Gale flyer, but we'll make sure we get everybody those questions. We have been in contact with Chris Irwin, chair of the House Education Committee. We have been in contact with GMA. They are well aware and appreciative that we're doing this webinar today. They desperately want to hear the clarifying questions that you have as school districts and schools. And we've also talked to representatives from the Department of Education. So all of them are on board. They know we're doing this webinar today. They're very appreciative. As you know, if you spent time looking through this 57-page bill, there's a lot of stuff there. And so there's a lot of agencies that are working together right now to try to get the most accurate information to share with schools and school districts. So we're going to go to our special guest today. We wanted to make sure for a couple of things. We wanted to show you the organizations that are involved in that work at the Capitol for you in public education every day during the session. So we've got Josh Stevens here from Page. We've got Dr. Rob Brown from GSSA, the Superintendent's Association. We have Stephanie Tanner and Justin Pauley here from the Georgia School Board Association. And then we're hoping, if she gets through with another meeting, that Margaret Ciccarelli from Page will also be joining us. So I wanted you to see these folks and know who these people are, because like I said, they are at the Capitol every day of the session, fighting for public education on your behalf. And so they will be chiming in at different parts as we go through this webinar. But they are truly the experts when it comes to all things legislative, when it comes to public education. And we're indebted to their service for what they do. All right, so those are the presenters that we have. As a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A. That way we can collect all of those and share those back out once we get them. I would also encourage all of you that are joining us today on the webinar, if you hear something or see something, or if you think there's something that you just have a pressing question about, you can reach out to any of us individually, but also reach out to your local House representative and your local state senator. They need to hear from you, the practitioners that are going to have to implement all of this. And I wanted to ask Rob Brown, Dr. Rob Brown of the Georgia School Superintendent's Association, if he would just very quickly go through just how bills are written, you know, from the political side, the politicians, and then how legal counsel gets involved. But Rob, would you take us through
Yeah,
that?
my pleasure, Ben. And it's important to remember that our folks are elected at the local level to go down and represent what we believe is our best interest. Sometimes we don't see eye to eye on everything, but the process gets in the way sometimes as well. And so let me touch on that. When we have an idea or perceived need to improve something, uh, uh, like school safety, our legislators will work with legislative counsel to try to articulate and communicate what that need is. Legislative counsel then takes it and they put it in writing. And sometimes, as you can read in a bill like this, it gets very convoluted. It can be cumbersome. It can be confusing. And that's where we, as practitioners, have a lot of conversation with those legislators during the process to try to clean up some things and to try to correct some things that may create problems for you at the local level. So that process, obviously, once a bill gets introduced, it has to pass both chambers. If it gets changed once it crosses over, then it has to be re-voted on when it comes back. And then ultimately, it's not law until the governor signs it or vetoes it, unless it times out. So House Bill 268 was a work of a lot of people coming together, communicating and collaborating, trying to make it an effective and a workable safety bill that's going to improve the lives of students in Georgia. I can tell you it was a lot of work, and I would encourage you to go back to your locally elected officials and tell them thanks for their efforts. Thanks for their work on this. It was very political at sometimes, with both the far left and far right, beating up the legislators who were trying to push and pass this bill, and really in an effort to try to help us. So just have some patience as we do sort through some things, and we don't have all the answers today, but we're certainly going to try to get all those for you as quickly as possible. I do want to say thank you to our CENTEGIX partners who are hosting this today, and appreciate the work that you do and the input that you've provided in trying to make our schools safer over the last several years.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. And so we'll move on. And the first thing we're going to talk about, I believe, is the mobile panic alert system. Many of you on the call today on the webinar, you are a CENTEGIX school district. So one purpose of this, as CENTEGIX is sponsoring this webinar, is for you to be relieved of some worries or apprehension simply by the fact that you use CENTEGIX. So there's a lot of the components of the school safety bill that you're already going to meet automatically, but we've got representatives here from CENTEGIX that'll go over some of those examples and talk about some of that. So by July 1 of 2026, every school district has to have a mobile panic alert system. Again, if you already have CENTEGIX, you're taken care of. If you don't have CENTEGIX, you've got a year to get your mobile panic alert system. And it has to be integrated and connected with both your local and state law enforcement and first responders. So I was going to ask CENTEGIX if maybe they would just talk about that a little bit, just to reassure the schools out there that have CENTEGIX that they're taken care of, and maybe give a contact person if they're one of the school districts that does not currently have a mobile panic alert system.
Ben, thank you. I wanted to offer a couple of comments here. One is that we have recently published a letter to all of our customers, and if somebody didn't get it, Jay Floyd can help you get access to it, outlining how CENTEGIX and our solution helps customers comply with both this mobile panic alert system requirement, as well as the next one that we will talk about, which is related to mapping. So that letter is available, and Jay Floyd can help you get access to it. And then also someone else, Ben, that I would like to introduce, who's joined us here from our CENTEGIX team, is Sylvia Ift. We are very fortunate to have Sylvia on our team as our head of regulatory affairs. Sylvia built the Safe Schools Office for the state of Florida, And so she has just an extreme depth of experience that we are so grateful to have on her team. So I'm actually going to rely on Sylvia to help provide some additional explanation for these next couple of slides related to our CENTEGIX services. Sylvia, thank you for being here today.
No, thank you very much for inviting me to talk on this. I'm really excited to speak on this bit of legislation that passed. It's really crucial legislation. As Mary mentioned, I'm former program director for the Office of Safe Schools that was formed right after the tragedy in Parkland. And one of my program areas was the implementation of Alyssa's Law. So we were the second state in the US to pass Alyssa's Law, but the first state to pass it as a mobile requirement. And I think that that has just been incredibly beneficial to the school districts in Florida and across the US that are implementing a mobile panic alert solution, not just for those extreme circumstances, but for the day-to-day benefits that they get from being able to have that solution. So just a couple of things that I want to talk about on intent, and Ben had already mentioned those. One of the main things that we were trying to solve for that came out of Parkland was to make sure that we are immediately sending a single alert to all responders. So that's your PSAPs, your command centers, your real-time crime centers, local law enforcement, fire, EMS. There was a lot of communication breakdowns that we were trying to solve for, and Alyssa's Law has done a tremendous job across the US for helping to solve that issue. And so now when you hit that button and it is an extreme emergency, you know that your exact location and who you are, that information is going directly to your PSAP, it's going directly to your first responders, and it's going to your on-site command centers and your district communications officials. So for the 90% or so of Georgia districts that are already implementing CENTEGIX, you're completely in compliance already. You have the capability there. What I will say, and I believe there's some language in the legislation as well, is just making sure that you are regularly coordinating with your law enforcement, your fire, and your PSAPs to make sure that those alerts are being sent exactly where they need to be and that everyone is on the same page with that. But again, you already have everything that you need in place to be completely in compliance with Alyssa's Law. The second part of Alyssa's Law that I wanted to talk about is the school mapping data. So big part of the school mapping data is making sure, again, that everybody is reading off the same sheet of music. So they have the exact same floor plans. They're going to have all of that information in place as the law requires, and you see there on your screen, having those floor plans labeled with the rooms, the exits, stairwells, fire extinguishers, keypads, cameras, all of that emergency information. And also things such as your AED kits can be marked on the map. The bleed control kits, I believe you have some legislation that passed last year requiring a Narcan program, so those can be added to your maps as well, so that when you hit that alert, you're going to know where all of that critical information is. And so everyone will be able to understand exactly where that alert is happening and where those safety assets are located. And all of this is to make sure that we expedite the local coordination for emergency response. On the next screen, I believe you will have a map that shows an example of the mapping requirements. So it's pretty comprehensive. This is a CENTEGIX blueprint map. All of our CENTEGIX customers should have this. You have the capability to add to that. And again, as Mary mentioned, be sure to get with Jay Floyd. I believe his contact information is within the presentation as well, and he can help assist with any of the requirements that your local law enforcement may want to have you add to the map.
Perfect. Thank you, Sylvia. I know one of the questions that we got from a school district was basically, we already have our own police department. We have our own dispatch. And they were just wanting to know if they would still have to be integrated with the local law enforcement in that community? And that answer is yes. But there is a caveat. We did talk to some of our experts at the DOE and GMA. What I think that school district in particular can do is if they can just make sure that their local 911 dispatcher is tied into CENTEGIX, I think that may help them meet that requirement. But our suggestion is to make sure that you talk to your local law enforcement, if you got county, if you got any individual city police departments, talk to GMA. But if you've got your own 911 dispatch, I think you're going to have to, at a minimum, include your local 911 dispatch in that as well. On the mapping here, some questions that came to my mind that I shared with our CENTEGIX partners when we were talking about all the different aspects that now have to be added to school mapping. I said, I've been retired for a full year now, but when we use CENTEGIX, we did not have all of the things that you're seeing on your screen mapped out. But Mary made sure I understood that that was very much a possibility with CENTEGIX. I asked her, is that something that CENTEGIX automatically maps out for a school district? Or is that something that a school district and or school has to map out themselves? So would y'all maybe talk a little bit about that, Mary or Sylvia?
Mary, would you like for me to take that one?
Thank you. Yes, Sylvia.
Okay, yes, perfect. Yes, so the answer is both. You both have the capability of updating your own maps, which is absolutely fantastic because, as you know, you acquire throughout the year new programs. Maybe you get a bleed control kit program. You add Narcan kits to your campus. So any of the CENTEGIX customers can go in and update those labels, those icons, those safety assets at any time throughout the year. Also, too, I believe there's a requirement for verification. So you can have CENTEGIX come in and help support that as well, from the verification to helping add those assets. So it's across the board that both are a capability that all CENTEGIX customers have, that ability to update your map at any time throughout the year as things change, but also receive support from CENTEGIX as well as needed.
Perfect. And I was at a school system earlier this morning. They were having a leadership retreat just on school safety. And as you can imagine, the bulk of their meeting in this all-day retreat was on this House bill. But they manually do that themselves. And they assured me that that was a pretty user-friendly process. And they bragged on the simplicity and user-friendliness of them being able to mark all of those. So I think if you currently do not have those marked in your school mapping, I think that's a pretty easy thing. If you'll just reach out to CENTEGIX, they'll provide the training on that. All right, let's move on, I think, to anonymous reporting. So again, back to that mapping, that's July 1 of every year. So we'll start in 26, but then you have to re-up that every year. So the anonymous reporting system, that'll begin also July 1 of 2026. Many of you already have an anonymous reporting system. I'm sure that Josh and Margaret and Rob can help jar my memory what some of those are, but I know there's anonymous alerts is out there. Help me out, folks. There's a quick
see something, say something is one.
See something, say something. And so many of you already have those. But even as a former CENTEGIX customer, if you will, at different school districts, I was not aware that CENTEGIX has something in-house if you're a CENTEGIX customer. So maybe Mary, Sylvia, maybe somebody could speak just a little bit about the WeTip solution inside of CENTEGIX if they don't already have something or if they're interested in looking at it.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I'll take that one. So we do have a separate product that we acquired early last year. It is not branded CENTEGIX. It has its own brand called WeTip. And it is, as indicated here, an anonymous reporting system. It's used by thousands of different customers across the country. And if anyone is interested in learning more, our man, Jay Floyd, is a great point of contact to go to for that.
Call Jay. All questions, call Jay. Josh, you got something?
Yeah, Ben, I was just going to add a little bit more context about those systems that might already have this program in place. You're okay right now while it's in place with whatever contract that you have, but the next time that you have a contract that comes up with whatever provider you do choose, you will have to make sure that that program substantially meets the requirements of House Bill 268, and there are quite a few different requirements spelled out in the bill of what that app must do. Mainly being that anyone in the community can have access to make a report of whatever the threatening situation is. And then there has to be 24/7 support. So it needs to be either directly connected to a call center, but then it also has to be staffed by licensed counselors as well. So there's certain requirements, and I'm sure that most of these apps are going to meet most of those requirements, but just make sure that whenever you are up to do a new contract for your app, that you pay attention to the requirements of House Bill 268.
A great point. And Josh, help jog my memory. Didn't the bill say that the state would provide one?
The state is going to develop one that's available to districts to use. There's not a whole lot of information yet about what that will look like, but it will meet all of these requirements, obviously. But yes, you will have access to a state provided app as well. There's not a timeline for when that's going to be developed, but I'm assuming it'll probably be before July 1, 2026.
Right. So that's great information that Josh shared. For those of you that already have an anonymous reporting system, make sure and be careful that before July of 26 that it meets all of those requirements in the bill. Very, very important part. All right, I think we can move on to the next one. All right, the behavioral threat assessment plan. This is not until January of 2027. So you've got a little time with this, but it's basically what it's saying is all school safety plans have to now address the students' behavioral or mental health needs. So if you don't already have some of those things in your school safety plans, even as the new school year is starting, I would probably try to be proactive and start putting some of those in or thinking about in the future what those would look like. You can see down at the bottom of that slide. And that DBHDD, that's the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, just for our people joining our webinar, but the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. So they, along with GSBA Homeland Security, they will provide training and support when it comes to those school safety plans meeting the students' behavioral health needs. So that help is coming. You can see that the date is to be determined on that, but it'll be sooner rather than later. And I'm sure they'll begin sharing that information with you. Even though they'll provide the training and support, you'll also have to submit that plan to DBHDD for approval. And I'm sure that'll be on a yearly basis, just like you're doing with GSBA or school safety plans. So any further comments on that, Rob or Margaret, Justin, anyone?
Ben, I would just reiterate, the law requires GSBA, Homeland Security, and DBHDD to provide training and technical assistance. If you're out there trying to find a model plan, I'm sure you can reach out to some of your RESAs and get a model plan to get started, but just know that that might change as things move forward and we receive that training and assistance from those agencies.
Good point. I think Rob brings up a great point just about RESAs and networking. The beautiful thing about whether it's PAGE, GSBA, Superintendent's Association, Gale, is that networking piece so that you've got colleagues around the state, and you may have a school district fairly close to you that already has a really good, tight school safety plan meeting the behavioral health needs. One that comes to mind is Hall County. I know they've kind of been on the forefront. Will Schofield is a superintendent up there. But it might be, worth some time to just have your person, whoever's over that, if it's a school safety director, student services director, to begin looking at some different school districts. I know I've heard Will speak and present on their program at multiple venues, and I'm sure that he and his staff will be more than happy to help any school district that would like any help. So, all right, let's go to the statewide alert system. I'll say, so at some point, GMA and Homeland Security, they will have a statewide alert system, but you can see that that date is to be determined. So right now that's based on future appropriations. So that's where we stand right now. We don't know when that may happen. The best explanation that I think I've heard in regard to this statewide alert system is think of a local Nixle alert that maybe your local sheriff's office or county emergency has to let you know what if it's a missing child or a bad accident blocking some certain roads in your community. But it's just something to an alert all over the state to let everyone know basically that there's an individual posing threats to a school. Josh, Rob, Margaret, is there anything on that that you want to add?
The only
Just-
thing I'll add to this is that there was no date specified on this item. It was actually subject to appropriations, and they did appropriate a little bit of money to this system. So I would assume that money was added for them to actually start building this out. And then it's the folks that might have followed this bill, there was a larger threat system that was included in there called the S3 database. And so I think you'll probably see that come back up in policy discussions in the coming years. But just know that this is kind of the groundwork for that.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, when I talked to Chris Irwin, he wanted me to share with our people watching today that this is the beginning and not the end. So I would look for some additions to be added to some of these things, possibly when it comes to school safety. He was adamant that he thought funding, that he felt confident in saying funding would continue. But why don't you maybe Rob or Josh or Justin, sometimes, and I'm not saying that this would happen, but there are some occasions, we saw it with the literacy bill this past session, where new legislation is dropped. Sometimes they even call it a cleanup bill. But would one of you like to talk about just and I'm not saying that it's even going to happen with the school safety bill, but how that process goes sometimes with the legislatures if they want to clean up something or make something a little tighter.
Yeah, I'll jump on that for a second, Ben. And I want everybody to realize when these guys are in session down there from January until the end of March, early April, they're getting hit from every possible angle. Our focus is on education, K-12 public education. We're focused on what's going on at the local level. And these legislators are getting hit, and legislative councils getting hit from all sorts of different angles. And there are hundreds, I don't know how many bills are dropped every year, probably thousands of bills that come across their desk. And sometimes things get passed that we didn't get everything cleaned up in. And so they'll have to come back the next year and work on. There are also sometimes, and Josh just mentioned the S3 database. I mentioned earlier that the political winds, far left, far right, everybody, they were going kind of crazy over the concept of this S3 database, thinking that it was going to be some sort of tracking list. We heard all sorts of different analysis of what that might look like and how it might affect students. And at the end of the day, that they scrapped it. I don't know if they scrapped it because of the financial cost that it was going to take. I think the estimate was like $25 million to create this database. But ultimately, it was a political hot button that they decided to cut out of the bill because it needs a lot more conversation, a lot more work to get put in there. That's also something that we, as an organization with GSSA, had requested and talked to them. We need some way to know if kids are entering our schools that have criminal history or that have pending disciplinary action. A lot of concerns about kids coming from the juvenile justice system and us not knowing until much later, what the child has been involved in. So a lot of those concerns, that was part of the conversation. So, but just in the process, a bill, especially one that's 70 pages long, is not going to be entirely what they want when they get it passed. But there's a lot of cleanup that will occur in future years, and some things that were discussed and requested this year that we were told, hey, look, let's get something in place and we'll build upon it as we move forward. So.
Great point. Just want to remind, I know we've probably had people join the webinar from when we first got started. We've got well over 450 people that registered for the webinar. And so we anticipated a lot of questions coming out of this webinar. So we want to encourage you to drop any and all questions that you have in the Q&A. I can see that we've already got quite a few in there. But GMA, the Department of Education, and Chris Irwin of the House Education Committee, they want to hear your questions. So we're going to collect those. We're going to get those to the appropriate agency. And then when we get all of those final answers, we're going to email everyone that was on that registered for the webinar. So you'll have a copy of those questions and answers. And we'll also put those on our website. It's our goal to make sure everyone gets all the information. And as we continue to go through this and I continue to read that 57-page bill, I'm convinced this probably will not be our only webinar on House Bill 268. We'll continue to get more information and clarification as we go.
And Ben,
Right, at this point, yeah, go ahead.
can I just add one thing to what Dr. Brown indicated? And I think oftentimes we saw this with House Bill 581 from last year. The cleanup bill was House Bill 92. This was a tax bill that I'm sure many of you heard about. But the cleanup ultimately, they see what implementation actually begins to look like and then have to come back during the next session to make some adjustments based on what they're seeing, what new data is showing. So sometimes it can be a good thing. So as you look at this bill, you see all the pieces to implementation, especially from an operational perspective. Feedback is great. And we all need to hear that as the associations, but also the legislators need to hear what's working and what's not working. So if something does need to be changed, we can address that. So I'd encourage you all to stay involved and engaged so that if that cleanup does occur, which it probably will, as we talked about, it's important to hear from you all and know what we can do to make improvements.
Yeah, that's a great reminder.
Hi guys, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Hey, it's Margaret Ciccarelli from Page. And I just wanted to add to what Justin just said. It's not a bad idea as we switch to operationalizing this legislation and implementation to invite your legislators, your delegation out to your school facility to walk the grounds, talk about what the implementation looks like, show them the tools that you were using. And especially if you're making a list, which I would encourage all of you to do, about maybe slight changes that you'd like to see to the legislation moving forward, or questions for either DOE, which will be writing guidance for some of this, or for the legislature, if we need to come back for any cleanup legislation. It will help if you also invite your delegation for a hands-on tour, and assure them that you are doing your best to implement this and kind of need their help to get it implemented successfully and tweak it as we move forward to make it to achieve its goals in the long term.
I think Margaret brings up an outstanding suggestion. Bring in your local House rep and your state senator. I would have my sheriff and police chief there as well. Maybe you even meet with your sheriff and police chief before you invite your local House rep and senator. But make sure that they see all of these things and these requirements that are in this bill, what that's going to actually look like for those of you that are boots on the ground that are charged with implementing this. I think that is very, very powerful. They will listen to you. They know you, especially if you get your sheriff and police chief in the boat with you. And you're all on a united front sharing information that's really good, things that you're really excited about and that you really like. And then maybe some things that you think are a challenge or maybe a suggestion of how things could change. So great point, Margaret. Thank you for that. All right, let's go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say one thing. I'm so glad that folks brought up implementation and how that may mean we want to amend the bill later, but just one more thing about how we will likely see more funding in the budget, and it's important that you make those requests, but you can use that school security funding that we've seen in the budget, and we saw additional money in the amended FY25 budget. So if you're seeing a need for more as you start implementing, that's a great thing to put on the radar of your local delegation. And I would expect to see more funding over the next couple of years as implementation occurs.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. And again, I want to thank all of the partner education groups for being here today. We've got every employee represented in the school district, with Paige, with the teachers, GSBA, with the school board members, Rob with the superintendents, and then Gail with all the other educational leaders. I think that's important. Again, just as a reminder, thank them for what they do for all of you in public education. All right, let's talk a little student record transfers. And this is the one that, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, I think we were just talking about this before we came on, but there wasn't an exact date in the bill. And usually when there's not an exact date, we always understand to take that as it starts July 1, correct?
Typically, yes.
Yes. So student record transfers, and this was one of the big topics. I was at First District RESA in Metter back in early November, and Senator Hickman of the Senate Education Committee was there. And when he was asking about what schools wanted and needed, this topic probably came up more in that meeting than any other. Rob, I think you were there too, weren't you? In Metter, weren't you there with me that day?
Yes, I was there, Ben.
But anyway, you could tell that he wasn't the only representative or senator there, but they were surprised at what we as practitioners, when we accept students, that sometimes we don't get all of the school records in a timely fashion. So that's where this part of it came from. And so one of the things they want to make sure of is that those are taken care of and given to the receiving school district within 5 school business days. And I think that's important to remember. That takes into account your holidays, your weekends, and things like that, to give it a good time frame. That's going to include everything. It's the full academic record, plus any Class A or Class B felonies and any evaluations, any type of problems that student has possibly had. Rob talked a little bit about the Department of Juvenile Justice and some of the issues that's caused or created for sometimes with schools and students moving from district to district, depending on where they may be housed. And currently the Department of Education, they're working very closely right now with DJJ to try to come up with some really good, clear guidance that they will be giving school districts on this. I'm going to see if any of my colleagues have any comments so far that they want to talk about.
Yeah, Ben, I'll just note that there's a large portion of this bill, I think probably 20, more than 20 pages, dealing with the transfer of records and the timeliness and who's responsible for what. And that has been communicated time and time again to our legislators. And all the listening sessions that we went through last fall, several this spring, that came up every single time about as a frustration point of us having to enroll kids that we don't know where they're coming from or what they've dealt with or what sort of issues they're dealing with on occasion. And we're being forced to enroll these kids and to serve them. And we certainly want to serve all children, but we also want to know what we're dealing with so that we can have appropriate measures in place to deal with their challenges. So this is a direct reflection of the communication that we've had from an educational leadership perspective to the legislative body. They've listened and they've heard from us. And really when we, some of the provisions that are in this that give you an opportunity to serve student virtually if you don't have records in place, things like that were at our request. And so we're appreciative of that. And when I say our request, I want to reiterate that Gail, GSBA, Paige, we work very closely together at the Capitol, and we really try to hit our legislative bodies from all different angles and have these conversations. So appreciate all the teamwork on that. But the transfer of records is perceived to have been one of the big challenges that led to the Appalachia shooting that we dealt with last school year. The tragedy that occurred there, there's some perception that if we had more timely transfer of records, that perhaps we could have done something to mitigate that situation. But this is a huge piece of the bill, and one that I'm appreciative of our legislators. Mostly Chairman Irwin, Chairman Hickman were both just fantastic during the session to have continued conversations throughout as we address these issues.
I think one of the key components is, like Rob mentioned, being able to enroll those students virtually if you don't have all of the information that you need. And I think that was a key win for school districts when it comes to school safety. I know I spoke to Matt Cordoza with DOE, and they are currently working on, if you've read the bill, Rob just mentioned, there's about 20 pages that talk about all of this, student record transfers, and they also talk about school districts having to come up with an MOU with law enforcement, local law enforcement, and the DOE is currently working on that. The guidelines and verbiage on those MOUs, and they'll be announcing those at a later date. So,
and also on that, just on that topic, since you brought it up, Ben, all that has to be in compliance with FERPA too. So FERPA doesn't disappear in any of this process. So just make sure you keep that in mind as you move through this process. You'll have to make sure you still comply with federal requirements as well.
Yeah, great.
As long as they still exist. Great
point. That is right. That is right. All right, let's move on to the Chief Privacy Officer of the Department of Education. So by December 31st of this year, the Chief Privacy Officer will be in place and will develop policies for all of that about data sharing that we've just been talking about. You'll get technical assistance and guidance from the RESAs. I know that RESA directors have as many questions as anyone when it comes to the school safety bill, because if you've read that bill, you see that they've got a lot of responsibility working with school districts, almost serving as a mediator if and when records aren't sent in a timely fashion. I think it would just behoove all of us as professional public educators to make sure that our people in our home district understand, hey, we're going to take care of business and we are going to get any student that we're sending to another school district, they're going to get all of their information within 5 days. We as our local home school district are not going to be a problem with this. And I think if we all do that, and I know the beginning of school is a very, very busy time and it changing of the semesters. But I think it's really, really important for us to lead the way as local public ed for doing that. There will be a complaint process in conjunction with the RESA that can go all the way to a complaint to the Attorney General's office if those things aren't followed. But again, you'll be getting all of those policies and guidance by December the 31st. But I would be working as hard as I could starting July 1 to make sure that our local school district was complying with that. You will have, like we said, those MOAs for those interagencies for information sharing, basically meaning if local law enforcement has an interaction with a school-age student about anything, whether it's felonies or anything that could even be construed with threatening behavior or something like that, that communication comes directly to the school district in a very timely process. So the RESA is going to have a student affairs officers to help monitor that compliance. I know I've heard from a lot of our RESA directors, they're desperate for a lot of clarification in their role in all of this. And I feel confident by December the 31st, we're going to have a lot of clarification for that. But I would just say you're going to have to be patient with our RESA directors as they figure some of this out at the beginning of the school year. Anyone from the team got any comments? All right. Okay. All right. The student advocacy specialist, this is that grant funded mental health position. As of right now, the way it's written, that'll be 1 per 18,000 students with a maximum of 3. I've had a lot of questions from school districts basically wanting to know, hey, we have 12,000 students in our district. Does that mean we can apply for one of these grant funded positions or not? And so I'm gonna see if there's anybody that wants to volunteer to answer that question. I answered it this morning at that school district I spoke at, so I hope I gave them the right answer, but I'm about to find out for sure.
The way I interpret it, and I think this was explained during the committee process, is it's up to 18,000, you get one. So if you have 1 to 18,000 students, you'll qualify for one of these specialists. If you have 18,000 to 36,000, that's when you get 2. And then if you have 36,000 plus, you get 3 grant funded. Now, that doesn't preclude you from using school safety funding money or whatever funding you choose to use in this situation to hire more of these specialists if you're a larger district. But if you are under 18,000, you will still qualify for 1 specialist.
And that's my understanding as well. And the way it's written is a base salary plus benefits is what's funded through the grant.
So to answer that question to the best of our understanding of the bill, every school district will have the opportunity to apply for one of those grant funded positions, at least one. You can see that DPHDD and the Department of Ed are going to define those qualifications and duties by December the 31st. And then they'll set the grant rules and the policy at the same time. So we assume that those grants will be open at the beginning of January or sometimes in the early part of the school year. I was trying to think, what would I do if I was still currently a superintendent? I think I would start looking around, without making a big deal of it, locally and finding out, do I have a pool of candidates that could fit that role, not knowing exactly what the qualifications and duties are. Those aren't real easy positions to find, is my point. So I would be looking around locally and just trying to find out how many people in our local 30-mile radius do I have, especially if I'm in a rural area, that I think could fit the needs of that student advocacy specialist. Any other comments?
See, Ben, that's where we're different. I think I'd be looking in the neighboring districts to see who I could pluck away from them to come and work.
Or steal, like Rob recommends. That's always a great strategy too. Steal the best. All right, I think we can move on to the training. All right, something a little different beginning in the 26-27 school year. There will be yearly training for students and for your staff. But your students are going to get that 1 hour of mental health, suicide, and youth violence prevention and suicide awareness. You see that one of those hours can either be in person, remote, digital, but one of them can be a part of their health and PE course. So if all of your 9th graders take health and PE as 9th graders, you can take care of them then. But you've got to have a plan of how you're going to address this. And you'll be getting guidance. You can see DOE and DBHDD are working on approving some training programs by next January. But be thinking about from a time standpoint, when are your 10th graders? When are your 8th graders? When are your 7th graders? When are your 12th graders? When are you going to work in this 1 hour of training? What is that going to look like for your school? Are you going to try to pick a particular subject area to do it, like in a social studies course? Or are you going to try to do it in a homeroom setting? I just think those are some things you can start thinking about logistically to have a plan. So when you get those approved training programs, you're at least ready to go ahead and push through with when you're going to offer those. The school clubs. Would anybody like to talk about the school clubs? I feel like I've talked enough.
I can talk about them if no
All
one
right.
else wants to.
Yeah, go Josh.
So the school club that must be created is a student-led prevention, basically a student-led violence prevention type club. And there must be a faculty advisor as the PowerPoint shows. This basically means that if you offer clubs within your school, that you cannot deny the formation of this club, basically. So you're required to create this club if you offer clubs in your school. There was a lot of debate around this, whether or not it should be required or not, but that's the requirement now, is that if you offer clubs in your school, you cannot deny the creation of a violence prevention club.
And all of you have clubs. So, I think the important part is start thinking about who's that faculty advisor going to be. You may or may not have interest from your student body, but like Josh said, you've got to offer it. It has to be available, and be thinking strategically of who that faculty advisor would be. All right, I think we are
Ben,
on
real quick, there was a question that was asked, and I think we probably need to clarify a bit on the student record transfer. I don't want to answer all the questions, but this one that came up. So the 5-day requirement is for schools to have those records transferred to all the parties. So you have to have that transferred to parents, guardians, and the receiving schools. For the information that goes to parents, you have to immediately release that information when a parent requests it. If that information is not, if you can't release it, if it's like a Friday or if it's a weekend when you get that information, that's when you have the 3 business days. So that's important to clarify. There's 2 different timelines within this. You have 5 days to get the records to the school that the child is transferring to, but you have to immediately if a parent asks for the records, that's when you immediately release them, or you have 3 days if it was off hours.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, Josh, for that clarification. All right. And just a reminder, we want you to put those questions in so we can get clarification, and we will share that out with everyone that registered for the webinar. All right, the last one, PBIS for high need schools, and that's your K-5 through and 6-8, your middle schools. But that's only applicable if your school received a score of a 1 or 2 for their STAR climate rating. So you'll have to have the PBIS plan. DOE is working again with DBHDD on that. So I would anticipate some guidance later on this school year on exactly what that PBIS will need to look like. But you can see there, the big change is now your staff is going to have to complete 2 hours of behavioral health training each year. So that's a little different there too. All right. Well, Mary, I think we are at the end of our portion of the webinar. We were going to try to keep it at an hour, and I think we were pretty good at that. Again, I just want to remind everyone to please drop your questions in the Q&A so we can get you that information and contact the correct authorities and entities and agencies to get the most accurate information. But I believe Mary's going to wrap us up with a little bit of information from CENTEGIX.
Yeah, Ben, well done. Thank you for getting us through all that content and for the add-ins that everyone provided. Really, I'll just end with a reminder that, as mentioned elsewhere in this webinar, CENTEGIX currently protects over 90% of the public K-12 schools in the state of Georgia. And we're honored that so many of you choose CENTEGIX to help protect your students and staff and communities. And between Crisis Alert, Safety Blueprint for your mapping, and our WeTip solution, we are here to continue to serve you. And Jay Floyd, I know Jay's on this call. He sent me a couple text messages while he's been on. Jay is your main point of contact. So Ben, thank you for partnering with us on this, and we'll get the recording out to everyone probably by the end of the day tomorrow.
Perfect. Thank you. And
may I make one plug in?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you go to our legislative website, Page's legislative website is pagelegislative.org, and then visit our capital report and scroll down a bit, you'll see our final legislative report. And we have a pretty substantial summary of this bill in there. So please feel free to use that as a resource and reach out to me if you have any questions after you read through that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. And I will say for our listeners out there, Page and GSBA both do daily reports from the Capitol. Yale and GSSA do not do daily reports from the Capitol, do we, Rob? But they do, and they do fantastic daily reports. So if you're not already seeing those, please go to their website. They do a phenomenal job of doing that and keeping everyone informed. So again, thank you to everyone. Please don't hesitate if there's anything that any of our organizations can do or answer any questions. If you got some questions that you didn't want to drop in the Q&A, feel free to email me those directly, and we will be glad to get you that information. Thank you, CENTEGIX, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their Tuesday.